Thank you for joining AdCap Network Systems webinar to discover how the Cisco Business Edition 6000 can help your organization solve today's collaboration challenges with a solution that will grow with the pace of your business. Presenting today is AdCap Network Systems Vice President of Solution Architecture, Michael Cavanaugh. Michael holds a dual CCIE and voice route and switch. Michael Cavanaugh, I'm going to pass the ball over to you.
Cool. Hello, folks, and welcome. Today we're going to talk about the Business Edition 6000, or the BE6K, and where it fits, and some little information about that and the platform for the mid-market. So let's start first. Who is AdCap? Who's talking to us? So AdCap, we were founded in 2002. We've got offices Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina. From a technology focus, we look at unified communications, server storage and virtualization, data networking, and security. We're a Cisco Gold Partner, Master Unified Communications, Master Managed Service, and Cloud Builder Partner. So a little bit about AdCap. Next question is, who is this guy talking? So as we said in the beginning, Ashley pointed out, I'm a dual CCIE, route switch, and voice. Worked for several big names in the industry, Cisco, GE, Bell South, AT&T. I have a deployment background, so I've actually had to make this stuff work, so I understand the bits and bytes of what it can do, what it can't do. I'm an author of 3 Cisco Press books so far, and I have several video blogs out there. So on our AdCap page on YouTube and my own channel. So it's kind of a way of saying I'm an old guy, I've been doing this a while. So what are we going to talk about today? First thing we're going to look at is in the beginning, right? How did we get to where we are now, right? The evolution of unified communications. Then we're going to look at the BE6K and specifically, what does it do and why do you care about it? So let's talk about evolution of UC. So if we go back quite a few years, voice and data were 2 totally different animals, right? In order from, well, one of the advantages really at the time was trying to offload toll bypass. In other words, if I had multiple sites and I had a private connection from my PBX between the sites, yeah, I could do a private line and then a data line, 2 different lines, and I'm paying for 2 circuits. Or I could route it out through the PSTN and pay long distance charges. So either way, I'm paying a lot to get my voice from location to location. I'm also paying to get my data from location to location. So the idea of let's eliminate those toll charges, let's use our data network, and let's ride voice over it. So essentially what we did was we came in and we said, let's do away with that PSTN link between my sites from a voice perspective, and let's route everything over my IP WAN. So that's how we started down this path. And the driver was to eliminate toll charges. So the next thing we said was, well, if we can do that, what if we replace that PBX itself with an IP PBX? And I can do central call control, and I can do central voicemail. And I can run all of that on my IP network. So at this point in time, Cisco bought a company called Celsius, which is where their call manager comes from. And the idea being is I can use an IP phone now and use IP as my primary transport with a gateway to my PSTN world. Right? So at that point, I'm starting to migrate off of PBXs to an IP PBX and control everything on IP. So once we've got that, we say, well, okay, we've got call control and we've got voicemail. What other things can I add? That's when we start seeing the expansion of features and different applications to drive some of that. Point-to-point, multi-point video calls. If I can do a voice call, why can't I do a video call? Contact center. If I've got some kind of call center or contact center, I want to be able to do reporting on my agents, have specific call treatments, things along those lines. I am in presence. I want to be able to tell if you're on the phone. I want to be able to IM you. I want to be able to chat back and forth. Emergency responder. If I dial 911, how do you want that handled? How do I report back to the PSAP where I'm at? Do I want to alert my internal security maybe to let them know that somebody in this building dialed 911? Attendant console. if I am the receptionist and calls are coming in, I may want an easy way on a computer screen to grab the call, look up John Smith, find out if he's free or not, drag and drop the call, and it goes off to John. Mobility. Came the request of, okay, I tend to live on my mobile phone, right? Everyone has smartphones nowadays. We use those a lot. How do I tie those in? Those are other applications we can expand to. Conferencing. So we get into conferencing conversations, whether we're talking audio conferencing, we're talking video conferencing, we're talking web conferencing, or are we talking all three? Today we're in a WebEx, so we are doing web with audio. And then third-party applications. What about applications that Cisco doesn't have, they don't offer, but other vendors have written to augment features and functions within the Cisco core? So we started going through the explosion of different applications and different features and functions. So the next step on this was every time I added one of these applications, I added a server, right? So if I have Call Manager, Pub, and Sub, that's 2 servers. I've got Unity and Unity Failover, it's 2 more servers. I've got Contact Center Failover, that's 2 more servers. I have Presence and Presence Failover, that's 2 more servers. That starts getting a little unwieldy, hard to manage, takes up a lot of data center space, things along those lines. So the next move after the explosion of applications was, how do I scale my servers? Well, the easy answer to that is to virtualize them. So we can take these applications, run them under VMware on one server as long as that server's sized to hold the applications that you need. So now I've gone from having 8, 9 servers down to 2. So as we start talking through this, there are so many different UC components, right? When we're talking about, I mean, where do you start? How do you choose the right applications? How do you plan for redundancy? How do you figure out which server you need? These are all questions that you need to think through. This is where the BE6K comes into play. So what is the BE6K and how can it help? So let's talk about what it is. In a nutshell, the BE6K provides a simpler but scalable and customizable way to enable the features that you need. So looking at your application options, your hardware options, and your licensing options, putting those in scalable parameters without having too many options in front of you. So let's talk through what I mean by all this. So we said we can break this down into 3 different things, right? What applications do I need for my business? What hardware do I need to run those applications, and how do I license them? So here we're going to look at application support. On the BE6K, these are your applications that we've got available to us. Cisco Unified Communications Manager, or if you've been doing this a while, Call Manager, right? That is my IPPBX. That is what controls my phones, my video endpoints, things along those lines. Cisco Prime Collaboration allows me to do provisioning and management across these applications. Cisco Jabber. Jabber is the front-end client that I can run on a PC or a Mac or an Android or an iPhone or an iPad, and that will allow me to do IM and chat as well as soft phone control and video control from a software endpoint perspective. Cisco Attendant Console we talked about a minute ago, where if I'm the receptionist, and I'm the receptionist and I want to be able to take inbound calls, drag and drop the call to somebody within my organization, that's what the Attendant Console will do for me. Unity Connection is my voicemail component. So from the Unity Connection, I can do things like retrieve voicemails, play voicemail back either through the phone or through your email system. It also lets me set up phone trees such as press 1 for sales, 2 for support, that type thing. Cisco Paging Server is an application that Cisco OEMs, which comes from SingleWire, which used to be known as Burby. So what that will allow me to do is set up paging groups. So if I want to page over the handset, say, for example, to the phones in the office, I can use the paging server to do that. Next application that is supported is the telepresence video communication server, or the VCS. So what this allows me to do is do interoperability between protocols. So if you've got, let's say, a video endpoint that speaks H323 and I've got one that speaks SIP, we want to talk to each other, I can run that through the VCS to do that. I can also use that as a component to extend it outside of my network. And what do I mean by that? So, for example, if you had a SIP endpoint today that was registered to VCS pair, and you dialed my email address, mcavanaugh@capnet.com, my endpoint would ring and we could have a video call. So I'm able to extend video outside of my network to anyone in the world over the internet, provided they've got a SIP endpoint. Next application supported on the BE6K is the Contact Center Express. So if we think about contact center, think about agents and queuing and reporting, right? So if somebody calls in on the phone, looks for an agent, see if they're available. If they're not, we queue them, give them whatever treatment we want, whether it's, queue list of music, whether it's grab their phone number, go against an SQL database and return information to the agent or to the caller. Those are features and functions that a contact center will give me, whether that's a phone call, a video call, an email, or an IM chat. Next option within this is WebEx meeting options, right? If I want to tie WebEx, like we're doing right now, to the BE6K, I had that as an option. So WebEx Meeting Center, one click to join a meeting type thing, and I can integrate that into the BE6K. And then finally, emergency responder. So this would be the application that would intercept a 911 call and then route that based on the location of the caller and potentially alert your internal security desk if you have one, to let them know that, hey, somebody at this number just dialed 911. So that's kind of a mouthful. There's a lot of different applications that are supported on the BE6K, but it's a easier way to go through and pick out what pieces do you need, which pieces do make sense for your business, and then roll that into the BE6K bundle. So let's talk through hardware options now. So the BE6K has two different hardware options. So when we talked about applications a minute ago, each one of those applications has specific hardware requirements. How many CPUs do I need? How much memory do I need? How much disk space do I need? That type thing. So I can marry the applications to the hardware right here within two different options on the BE6K. The medium density server will give me the provisioning application in up to 4 other applications. So that can be Call Manager, that can be Unity, that can be IM Presence, and say Contact Center. All right, whatever 4 makes sense for your business. So that's kind of where the BE6K started, was those 4 applications. Cisco got a lot of requests saying, hey, I need to run more than 4. I need more of those applications. How do I do that? Well, one way is you add another BE6K medium density server. The other way is Cisco came out with a high capacity server that gives me the capability now of running many more of those VM sessions. So I can run 4 plus the provisioning on the medium density server. The high capacity server, I can run the provisioning and 8. So picking the hardware kind of depends on the software that you're looking for and the applications that make sense for your business. Under the covers, what this comes down to is the CPU and the memory on these boxes to be able to scale to provision the amount of applications that you need. So the next part of the BE6K and kind of part of is the endpoint portfolio. Now, there is no difference between endpoint portfolio whether you're talking full Call Manager deployment or you're talking BE6K. And that's kind of what I wanted to point out here. Whatever phones you have available to you in Call Manager, you also have available here. So you're not giving up any feature or function from an endpoint. So the end user doesn't really know or need to know that you're running a BE6K on the back end as opposed to a full Call Manager implementation. They just need to know, I have a video endpoint, you have a video endpoint, I call you, it works. Or if I have a phone, you have a phone, I call you, it works. That's really what they care about. So all of the things that are available in the Cisco portfolio can be a client or an endpoint in a BE6K world. All right, so let's talk about licensing. So we talked about the applications, we talked about the hardware, we talked about any endpoint that Cisco makes we can use, as well as some third-party third-party SIP endpoints. So how do we license this? The licensing options are based on kind of what you're looking for from an application perspective. And here's what I mean by that. It used to be that you would go out and you would buy an application, say Call Manager, and then you buy licenses for it. And then you'd buy Unity, you buy licenses for it. You'd buy Presence, you buy licensing for it. It became a little unwieldy to keep up with all of the different applications. So Cisco came out with something called Unified Workspace Licensing, or COOL for short. So within COOL, I buy a user. Now I assume that user is going to want Call Manager. They're going to want voicemail. They're going to want Jabber. So those are all included in that license. I also have some WebEx options that I can add to that user if you need it. Okay? So that's the COOL licensing model. And kind of think about that as like a business user, right? Somebody who's going to need these applications. Your next option is called User Connect licensing. That is a per application, per device, a la carte type licensing like we started with. There are times when I do need to order just a phone. For example, I'm talking on a conference room phone right now. There should not be a user, there's no voicemail, there's no Jabber, but I do need the phone to be licensed. So that's kind of where a User Connect license would come in. So the two different license models, one based on endpoint device or voicemail or one single application, and one based on user. Hopefully that makes sense. So if we bring all this together, I mean, what is the BE6K? It is a combination of things. It is the hardware to run your applications, it's the applications that you need within your business, and then it's the licensing to run them. In the BE6K model, you really are a full-blown Call Manager installation. Your limits are 1,000 users, 50 sites, 100 contact center care agents. So why that limit, and why does Cisco do it this way? At the end of the day, this is a mid-market play, right? So for customers that have less than 1,000 users, you may not need the big beefier servers, right? So a lot of times with less than 1,000 users, less than 50 sites, less than 100 contact center agents, that's a good fit. So that limit is based on the BE6K servers, the hardware that we're actually running this on. So that hardware comes in two flavors, as we talked about, right? We talked about the medium density and the high capacity. Medium density, I can run up to 4 of these applications. The high density, I can run up to 8 of them. And then once I choose my applications, I know which server I need, and then from a licensing perspective, we can license it based on whether I'm user or whether I'm endpoint device. So hopefully that's clear as mud. So at the end of the day, why should you care about the BE6K? Honestly, it is where sophistication meets simplicity, right? There are a lot of moving parts in the UC world. There are a lot of different options. There's a million things that you can do. What do you want to do? All right, I'm now able to take through all of the options, figure out what makes sense for your business, and then run that on a BE6K server to provide a complete end-to-end solution based on what you need. Doing it this way also is more affordable. I don't have to buy the full-blown infrastructure. I buy just the pieces that I need, right? I can interoperate with multiple third-party endpoints, whether we're talking a legacy telepresence, say a Polycom or something along those lines, or whether I'm talking a SIP phone or a soft client. I can also do high availability with this. So we talked about on the standard or the medium density server, I can have up to 4 applications. What if I want redundancy? So let's say I'm running Call Manager, I'm running Unity, I'm running Presence, and I'm running Contact Center. If I want them redundant, I add another BE6K server, and then I've got a redundant pair now. So if I lose any one server, I'm still operational. And that falls right into scalability, right? So from that, I can scale that out to my different sites, provide that redundancy, and provide SRST and things along those lines, so where if I lose a connection, I can still operate and my business is still running. So why should you care about this? It allows me all the bells and whistles of UC. It gives me all of the productivity tools that I need from a communications standpoint to help my business. It scales, and it saves you some money. Make sense? So at this point, I'm going to open up to questions.
Yeah, Cav, we've had a couple of questions. First question, does the BE6K support WAN redundancy?
Yeah, very much so. So in order to set this across the WAN, so we talked a minute ago about being able to add a second server. I can add that across the WAN and get redundant. There are some bandwidth considerations you want to think about since you've got active applications, real-time applications. So we do need to make sure that I've got enough bandwidth to be able to handle that sync, but beyond that, absolutely.
Okay, the next question we got is, does publisher or subscriber take up to 2 server slots on the BE6K?
No, on the BE6K, the way it's spec'd out, I'm going to take up 1 server slot, quote unquote. The server slot really comes down to how much virtual memory, virtual CPU, and virtual disk space does the application take. And the way the BE6K is sized, it is sized for up to 1,000 users of specific applications. So in other words, call manager, pub, and sub, you're looking at, if I remember correctly, 2 virtual CPUs on that. So you've got more than enough to handle that.
Okay. Does the Business Edition 6000 support more than 2 nodes in the cluster?
So yes, the BE6K, I can add multiple physical hardware nodes, absolutely. From a call manager perspective, I can have multiple subscribers, so a publisher, multiple subscribers. From an IM and presence node, I can have multiple nodes of that. When we get into some other applications, such as Unity, for example, I can do HA between those 2, which means I can fail over between 2 nodes, so I'm kind of limited there. Contact center, the same thing. If I'm HA within contact center, I have 2 virtual servers running. If I lose any one, it'll fail over to the other, but I can't go beyond 2 and still keep it the same contact center.
Okay. We just had another question come in. If you have BE6K at main office, what equipment required at remote locations? So
typically, if I've got a remote location and I've got a BE6K at the head office, I would typically do an SRST solution in that case. So depending on the size of that remote office, let's assume it's a small office, then I'm typically going to put a voice gateway out there, PoE switches and phones. On the voice gateway, I'm going to run SRST, which is remote survivability, which essentially means if I lose that data connection, the phones will register to the router. And if I've got local dial tone, I can still take inbound calls and send outbound calls. So typically, I'm going to do an SRST model on a small office. If it's a larger office, then we might want to talk about putting a server out there with a subscriber.
Okay. We don't have any more questions coming in. So again, I just want to thank everyone for joining our webinar today. If you have any additional questions, you can reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to help out. We have recorded today's webinar, so be on the lookout for our email, which will, 1, announce the winner of our $100 gift card or $100 charitable donation, and we will also have the recording of the webinar. So again, thank you everyone for joining, and we hope you have a wonderful day.